Heyo, Tish here. This is the third and final part of how to use every class in Rabbit and Steel. If you haven't seen the previous two parts, which cover the starting classes and the unlockable classes in Kingdom, those videos will be in the description. If you haven't seen them, how this series goes, pretty much I cover each class's ability rotations, their core mechanics, and things you should know about the class. So, with that said, let's get started. First up, we have the Hammermaid. So, Hammermaid's rotation goes something like this. Assuming that you're starting, going into a stage and the boss is in the middle, you can use your secondary, your defensive, and either use your special or your primary accordingly. Now, you'll notice that the core mechanic for Hammermaid is that she has unique damage calculation where her special and her defensive will use the damage based on the primary or the secondary. So in this case, the default special uses your primary's damage, and your defensive will use your secondary's damage. Now, of the classes in the game, I do find Hammermaid to be my least favorite in terms of both playing as the class and her consistency. And the reason for that is because of this unique damage calculation. It means that you pretty much want to ideally focus on, let's say if you want to focus on your primary damage, so your primary and your special are strong, then you want to select loot and upgrades that fit that mold. But more often than not, because of the large pool of upgrades, this doesn't really always pan out. And so Hammermaid ends up becoming a very build-dependent class. It is very much, if you don't have a good build, you don't pick good loot and get the upgrades that you're going for, your damage is not going to be very high with this class. Now, you'll see that the primary by default does 160 damage on a GCD of 1.2 seconds. So you see, it does slow you down a little, but it's not too bad. But the special at this point will do 160 times 2 damage on a 1.4 GCD. So yes, you do deal more damage over time, and you do get a charge back. You get a use for each when you ever use a different ability. So like, I can use my defensive and it also gives me a use. But you can see this special is very slow. And the primary for Hammermaid already slows you down quite a bit. So when you use this special, you can spam it. You can see here. It is very slow. Slow enough that I find this class to be quite unwieldy at times, because if you say use your special, you are committing to essentially, I'm not going to move very much right now. And if you do need to move, that GCD is quite high. And for Hammermaid, this is pretty rough, because compared to other classes, like for example Druid, who also has a fairly high GCD on her, like secondary for example, once you set that secondary, you don't have to keep using the secondary. You can use something else like the special, which doesn't slow you down, or your primary, which slows you down a little, but it's very minor. But with Hammermaid, you very much, if you want to keep your damage up, you have to keep using your abilities. And because your primary and your special slow you down so much, more often than not, it's very easy to get hit. And so the solution to that is with the secondary. So the secondary here As I showed at the beginning, it allows you to move very quickly. You essentially move very quickly for a brief moment, and then you swing to your left and right. Unlike your primary here and your special, which are in one direction, kind of like Bruiser's primary. So this secondary is very useful, just, you know, if you want to hit 2 bosses at the same time. But it is also your main form of mobility, because as you can see, a lot of Hammermaid's abilities really slow you down a lot. So your secondary is really your only saving grace for giving yourself good movement. The thing is, I find that this movement is very difficult to control, in the sense that because your other abilities have such a high GCD relative to what you're doing, I find that you end up fighting against the class a lot, trying to move. Like, you struggle to move because let's say that there's a pattern incoming, but you've committed to using your special and you're really slowed down. So in a panic, you try to use your secondary and it moves you all over the place and you kind of lose control. So there is one thing you can do to remedy that, which is to focus. If you focus while using your secondary, the movement's a lot more controllable, and you can do some micro movements. It's a bit easier. The thing is, like with, for example, like tapping, the special is just slow enough that I find that tapping is just not not fast enough. And yeah, more often than not, I do find I have to use a secondary, like focused and then unfocused. So like, for example, if I need to move quickly, but then I need to slow down, I can focus in the middle of the secondary to control my speed a bit. So hopefully I don't overextend. But I do find that because of the way that the secondary works here, which is honestly the range is a little short. So if you need to do a lot of movement, like for example against the King's Arsenal boss, Marin, her patterns that during the laser segments become pretty tricky with Hammermaid, because you have to try to keep yourself in range of her, but she's teleporting left and right across the screen. And so sometimes like your primary or your special won't hit, and when you commit to using your special or primary, sometimes you just won't have enough time to get out of the way of a laser. So I do find that Hammermaid is the most tricky class to use. It's straight up the class that I struggle the most using, and whenever I'm going for like achievements such as for example, these levitation rings here, where you have to clear an objective with every rabbit, or for example unlocking the pallets, I do find Hammermaid to be usually the last class I unlock these with, just because I find Hammermaid just very inconsistent in terms of being able to deal good enough damage while also still having enough movement to survive. So continuing on, the defensive is the first instance here where we see that you can see this wording here is not on the GCD, but will run your GCD for 1.5 seconds when used. So it just means that you can't do anything for 1.5 seconds after you use your defensive, because it will run your GCD. You can still use your defensive to cancel effectively into, like for example, if I'm using the special here, I can cancel it effectively and still do this defensive, but then my GCD will be run for 1.5 seconds. So during that, I won't be able to do any other attack. So like, as you can see here, I'm holding special and nothing's happening. Which is why I will say to be careful with buffering your inputs, because you really don't want to buffer like something that will be very slow. Like for example, if you commit too hard to using the special, let's say you have like 5 uses like I do right now, and you just hold it, and sometimes by the time you realize that there's a pattern coming up that you need to move, you find yourself stuck using this special, and you may get hit while being stuck in that really slowed down movement. Now, when I said that Hammermaid is very build dependent, there are things to mitigate the movement problems, like her Emerald Defensive, which straight up just gives you the unaffected by loot or abilities that change movement speed. So now you just don't even have to worry about it. And frankly, when I see this upgrade, I usually always take it, because that is how much I find Hammermaid to be a bit difficult, to be rather difficult to use with her base kit. Of course, there are other ways you can get this effect, such as, for example, the Midsummer Dress. Effectively, a crutch gives you another HP, and also gives you a bit of movement speed as well, which is very, very nice. Now, as for the upgrades are very kind of scattered all over the place, because the way that Hammermaid is designed to work is that she has a lot of upgrades that give her different effects. So depending on what loot you've already taken, you would choose your upgrades accordingly based on them. So like for example here, we just have like a general like useful 20 damage up and cooldown reduction by 1 second. You have, deal less damage, but your GCD for this is reduced. But as you can see, percent chance triggers no longer happen for loot or abilities. So I would be careful about taking this one. It's also very fast. But if you, let's say, have very high secondary damage in some form, this would be potentially quite good. But you really want to be careful about bricking your build. If you've taken a lot of percentage chance based loot and you accidentally take this upgrade, yeah, you've kind of bricked your build a bit. The Opal Double Smash is just, you get 2 uses. So if you don't want to use your, let's say, maybe you don't want to use your primary too frequently, or actually in this case, you use it frequently enough and you want to use your special as like a burst of damage, then there's that. There's also the Opal Defensive, which, yeah, it runs a cooldown longer, but it gives you another use of your defensive, which I do find very nice. This defensive, the thing is, it also slows you down substantially, as you can see in the base kit. And you want to be wary of when you use this, because remember, it runs your GCD for 1.5 seconds. So if you use your defensive and say that you need to suddenly move out of the way very quickly, like you are still in range of taking damage while you're still in the defensive animation, you can't just quickly switch to your secondary because you're running that GCD for 1.5 seconds. So in the event that you do need to, get out very quickly, it can be difficult, because this slows you down substantially. Your primary slows you down, your special slows you down. Your secondary is really your only form of high movement. So you want to keep that in mind. So having 2 uses of this defensive is nice to have, especially when you find that you end up using it quite early, just for damage. So next up we have the Sapphire Primary. Sapphire Primary I find very useful if you have, honestly, if you have good primary damage and you're spamming your special, like maybe you have some other way of refreshing your special. Either you're using your secondary to get those uses back, so that way you can use your special or whatnot. Yeah, you can just disable your primary and, focus on using your other abilities instead. And you'll just get damage based on how many abilities you use. Of course, you have a standard, secondary upgrade, just more damage. Instead of slowing movement, greatly increases movement, which is very interesting. As you can see, yeah. If you, it's a lot of these abilities are very much like up to feel. It's something that, you know, once you pick up during a run, you have to get used to using, which is why I find Hammermaid pivots a lot depending on, you know, what kind of loot or upgrades you're getting access to. And then we have the Sapphire Defensive, which is just more damage, and it no longer slows movement. But you can see that it still runs your GCD for 1.5 seconds, so that is worth noting. We have, like, for example, like Burn, and actually, this is pretty funny. Getting access to Berserk, which is really good because getting that GCD down to 0.8 seconds is great. And as you can see, because of how Berserk works and in how its mobility increase, it kind of ignores your base like slowdown. You can effectively use Berserk to pick up items that you normally would not take because they are not very safe. For example, I would be very, very careful of taking any abilities or loot that slow you, or in this case mostly loot that slows you down. For example, like the let's say the club, yeah, either the club, either this type of set that slows you down. I would be very careful about taking these because you are already very slow as Hammermaid, and yeah, you can see it really exacerbates this. And actually, Hammermaid was designed in mind with this unique damage calculation to not perform very well with loot like this, without you know, taking other loot that will, for example, remove that movement penalty. Because yeah, these are, you really do not want to stack these if you don't have any anything that removes this penalty. To be very careful of that. But from there, of course, yeah, Berserk is another option that will help alleviate that. Now you also have, let's see, the Ruby Special, which now uses its own damage entirely. It just acts like a normal ability instead of being reliant on using the primary for damage calculation. And you can see here, like, even the Ruby Defensive will also change from your secondary to your primary damage. That's worth noting as well. It's also, as you can see, very different, just like more akin to your primary and your special in terms of the range. You also have access to luck-based builds, like with the Garnet set here. So, you know, 20% chance, just flat charging your special. Which this is, I actually do find quite nice, because if you're focusing on, you know, using your special, maybe you've taken the Sapphire, let's say Garnet secondary, and then you take some other special, then you can focus on using your secondary to as your form of movement, right, and your damage, while also, you know, being able to dish out some good damage using your special. Likewise, the Garnet special is also nice for keeping up that uptime. If you, let's say, want to focus on only using your special, then, you know, you can pivot into banking on a 40% chance to get a use back and charge it. And a very interesting upgrade I find kind of is unlike any other upgrade in Hammermaid's kit is that it's just straight up rabbit luck for the team and a shield, which is pretty crazy. It is, I believe, for a, okay, let's see, yeah, it's for 5 seconds, which is the same as Dancer. Yeah, and it no longer runs your GCD, so that means that you can, you know, use other abilities while you're using your defensive. It also grants a shield, so this is actually quite powerful if you just want to, you know, deal some, provide some good support for your team, or you have a lot of percent chance based like weapons or loot, and you want to proc them more consistently. Then there's the Emerald set, which I find the Emerald upgrades to be the most interesting, frankly. For example, like, okay, the Emerald Rabbit Smash here is not very good because it does increase your GCD quite a bit. But the thing is, it's giving you a high base damage. So if you want that, and, you know, for example, your special is dependent on that damage calc, then special or defensive, you can use it for that. See, this one also has a cooldown, which I think is kind of strange. Yeah, I do think this one's kind of weird to use because if you don't have good movement, you kind of don't want to gimp your only movement option. There's also, for example, the Emerald Special, which reduces your GCDs to 1, which is really nice if you want to focus on your primary and secondary damage. And then, of course, I mentioned earlier the defensive, which is just very nice if you want to kind of ignore a lot of the movement penalties that Hammermaid has. All right, next up we have the Pyromancer. So Pyromancer has a more conventional rotation than Hammermaid, and it would look something like this. Your special, your primary, your special if it's charged again, your defensive, your primary, and then your special. And then you can use your secondary. So you want to use it in this order because your primary has a 50% chance to reset your special and charge it. So, you know, when you're going to battle, your special will not be on cooldown, so you want to use it immediately. Your special, if your primary, if it doesn't charge it, then you can use your defensive to get that back. So you'd go special, primary. If your primary didn't charge your special back, then you can use your defensive to get a primary use back and then go for another special. And during that downtime, you can use your secondary. Now, you can see that I would say Pyromancer has a very interesting rotation in that you can see like the attacks here. The special is a kick that will shoot an orb that goes in a line. And I will say it is very important to, even if you know that, for example, your specials no longer on cooldown, you have it, but you're not in range of your target to land the hit. I would say actually save your special, because the special, as you can see, has pretty high damage. So if you miss this special, it's especially, let's say if the opponent is teleporting or moving off screen, if you miss this special, this is a lot of damage loss. And yeah, of Pyromancer's kit, it's the only one that you actually have to aim. The primary is aimed, the secondary is aimed. So of course these can be avoided sometimes, but it's not as, you know, volatile as the special here. Now, I would say for the defensive, you don't have to use it all the time, because the primary at base only has a 3-second cooldown. So, as you can see in this case, like, you can see when I used my defensive, my primary only had 1 cooldown left. So, I could have just waited. Like, I could, you know, sprinkled in a secondary there. Just wait for that reset. And so that way you don't have to use your defensive if you don't need to. The defensive is similar to, like, I would say it's similar to Sniper. You know, it erases bullets around you. It gives you that small boost in movement speed. But of Pyromancer's kit, I would say her focus is kind of on, as you can see, she already has a percentage chance based you know, primary. So you can definitely focus on percent chance things, and then hopefully get, you know, some rabbit luck. As you can see, like, the Garnet upgrades have, you know, this one just straight up makes you significantly luckier at all times. So it'll increase your consistency with your special and your primary, as you can see from here. Really nice stuff. And I do find that because of that, Pyromancer is actually quite easy to build, because you have a lot of options in terms of you can either go for percent chance stuff, you can either focus on a more consistent rotation, like for example the opal one here, which always resets your special. And you know, this one has a longer cooldown, but then you have a secondary that will lower those cooldowns. Or you just get 2 kicks, because why not? Likewise, just more consistency. For example, if you want more uses or you want a larger hit chance, there is a loot that, based on your secondary use. Oh, here we go. Yeah, for example, this one, which, you know, 30% chance, and you're increasing the amount of hits, you know, it's just more likely to get those hits in. And likewise, this one even gives you erasing bullets, but I will note that this one changes your, as you can see, it changes your special to be, not, instead of a kick, it is a AoE around you. So I will note that, because some bosses will try to push you away or incentivize you to stay away from them. So sometimes, yeah, like for example, the witch does push you back quite a bit unless you play very aggressively. Sometimes it can be difficult to get in range with this special. In that case, you'll have to rely on your primary and secondary to deal damage during those phases. You know, there's also effects like Ghost, which, you know, is just great for consistency. And or like you can go into Ruby primary, which essentially changes your primary to be a similar kick to your special, which yes, you do have to be careful, very careful while aiming this one. Or you just, like for example, your secondary is your typically the least important part of the kit in terms of damage, so you can just focus on no longer dealing damage and instead just getting a beneficial effect like resetting your primary. This will be especially useful if your primary is on like high cooldown. Like for example, taking like the opal one here or whatnot. Otherwise, pretty much, you know, just dealing more damage as the luck-based build. Or just, for example, automatically use, just no longer being a usable ability and just proccing every time you use your like secondary, for example, and movement increases. This one also is interesting because it gives you access to Abyssal Flame, which also lowers your cooldowns. So it's quite interesting, the options that you have here. Every 5 seconds, you give yourself a buff. Really good stuff. Longer be reset and charging. So overall, I do find that if you want to run like a luck-based build with either a luck-based or like a hit-based build with Pyromancer, it's very easy. Just be wary of that special, which, you know, depending on if it's like the kick type, then you'll need to make sure that you can actually connect those, because otherwise you're losing out on a lot of damage. Next up, we have Grenadier. So Grenadier has a less conventional rotation. So it's something like this. You can use your special, you can use your primary, you can use your secondary, your defensive, and likewise. So the gimmick, the core mechanic of Grenadier, I would say, is the primary, which the primary is a gun. And this gun can be reloaded by your secondary. So I would say you really want to avoid taking, for example, a like anything that disables your secondary, because disabling your secondary effectively means you've just also disabled your primary, because you cannot reload your primary. So yeah, I really would recommend doing that. Likewise, your defensive also, as you can see, the base description is very brief. It just gives you some info. But it also resets your GCD when used. So what you'll notice is that the GCDs are quite high. For example, the secondary here has quite a high GCD. GCD for special is a bit lower, but you can see this is quite a substantial slowdown. This reloading animation. So you can use your special or defensive to reset that GCD and essentially get a quick reload. So I can show this off really quickly. So you can use it to effectively cancel your reload time. And you can do a similar thing with the special. You want to chuck your special, without slowing you down too much or being safe during it, you can chuck it, and I'm sure that animation was what it was intended for. But the thing is with Grenadier is that this reload animation is very slow. And so you want to take loot that mitigates that in some form. Because the secondary, I believe the upgrades for the secondary actually don't deal damage. They typically apply effects to your primary. So that means that you don't have to worry about taking damage penalties. Like for example here, like the Windbite Dagger, which allows you to reload very quickly. And that really helps with that movement there. You don't have to be stuck in that animation for so long. There's also the Winged Cap, yes, which also does a similar thing. It also gives you a small movement speed too. This can be very nice. Just to lower that. You can see like the primary doesn't slow you down. Wait, let me remove this. The secondary slows you down a lot. The special doesn't slow you as much as your secondary because it doesn't last as long, but it still is a substantial slowdown. And your defensive also slows you down. So I would say like you definitely want to be careful about when you use your secondary, because for example, like in Subterra Sanctum's boss, during the pursuit part of it, using this secondary during that could mean that you're running into a wall or into an orb because you can't react fast enough to you can't move out of the way in time because you're stuck in that slowed animation. Another thing is that a lot of Grenadier's upgrades do change a lot of aspects of her kit. For example, let's just briefly cover the easy ones, like the secondaries, which just allows you to apply debuffs. It's very reliable, like the Opal one. There's also the Sapphire one here, which now will allow it to deal damage, but instead the damage is added onto your special uses. You can see there that additional 100 damage applied to your primary. You also get debuffs too, like Sticky Bomb here, and like 30% chance here too. And also just the Emerald one, which just increases your capacity. So getting more reliability there. But I think the more interesting discussion here is with the different primary upgrades, because your primary is I would say your main source of damage. Your special, it kind of depends on the build, but the primary is typically the one that you'll always end up upgrading towards. So like, for example, this one changes it a lot. You can see like, yeah, it doesn't have the best of range depending on, let's see, reload. Yeah, you can see like, even though I'm focused, yeah, it has this like arch to it. And it only has 4 shots. There's also like an auto-aiming one. You can see. This is kind of reminiscent of Assassin's Secondary in terms of that auto-aim. There's also the Ruby one. Ruby one is, yeah, reminiscent of Bruiser for me. How this attack looks. And there's also the Garnet one. The Garnet one is, yeah, as you can see, it has like auto aim in of itself. It's also very good because it hits the 2 closest enemies. So this is really good for your multi-target bosses. And then your Emerald one, which, as you can see, is very reminiscent of Pyromancer's primary or special. But since you only get 2 uses of it, it does have a very high base damage. So you can use this in conjunction with like Burn to deal more damage. But yeah, I will be wary of that. Make sure that you land those shots because you don't have very many of them. Unless you know, so happen to get the Emerald one, which will help your consistency a bit. The special, all of these have pretty different effects, and they also, some of them do change the arc which you throw the special. Because the special by default is, you see, like, the range is not that long. And if you're on top of the enemy, as you can see, it'll throw it to kind of the side here, which, depending on if the enemy, the target moves, that could cause the special to whiff. Which is why I would say that, yes, you can, like, if your special's off cooldown, you can use it. But whether or not you use it, while you still have primary uses left, I would say is up to how you're positioned. If you need to move quickly, you don't want to. Sometimes you may not even be able to use your secondary or your special because of that movement penalty. Even if your primary already has expended all of its uses, and for whatever reason you don't want to use your defensive to cancel that secondary reload time, definitely just use your. I would say just use your special when you feel it's safe, because otherwise it does slow you down. You want to be careful of that, and also that arc means that sometimes even if you have an opportunity to use your special, it may not hit. See here, like, for example, a more defensive option that, you know, allows you to erase bullets. It's also multi-hit as well, which is nice. This one's very interesting as well, the Ruby one here, because it can be very nice for example, 2 bosses like on each side. You can throw this in the middle, but just note that the range is not that long. Like the Garnet one here, it's a small radius, but yeah, it's very interesting. Yeah, some of these are left and right, direction you're facing. Size of explosion is smaller, and this one is like a DOT, kind of similar to Druid, and it's a pretty big range too. But the defensives upgrades mainly change how the special works. So for example, this one will just add another debuff on your special. Yeah, it just adds another one. It's also a random debuff. You can also add, like, for example, it does less damage, but it hits more times. So this can be useful for, as I mentioned before, any, for example, something that you need a lot of hits for. Like if you want to abuse the, the earrings here. So like every 10 times you deal damage or beat debuffs, you can stack this very quickly if you have a lot of multi-hit things. Yeah, it's just really reliable, and with that, and with the Grenadier's like base, quite high GCD or quite low GCD, means that you can get a lot of shots off. Like I mentioned earlier, you do want to, I would say, like, prioritizing, if you want to cancel, use your defensive to cancel a GCD. Ideally, like, cancel your secondary just because it has a higher GCD than your special. And as well, like, you could focus on, for example, this one. Yes, this one will change the distance you throw your special. So this one will make it so that way it's pretty much like thrown right above you. This is a bad example. Let me place just the, you can see that is significantly shorter, but you can see that it trades that distance for giving you more damage, but also giving a shield. And that shield is also party invul. That's really nice. Similar to Heavy Blade and a Defender. Or like, for example, this one, which just gives your allies a buff. Really nice stuff. You just want to focus on team buffing. And these are all just additional effects too. So even though the defensive, you know, is like the base defensive is pretty much like a no frills defensive. It doesn't even give you movement. But a lot of these upgrades do have a lot of useful utility. Like even the emerald one here is just straight up like, okay, I'm druid now. I just summon I summon a butterfly that also deals damage. So a lot of options here to explore with Grenadier. But yes, I will say the focus of Grenadier is just to get that movement penalty and GCDs down, so that way you don't have to worry about like reload times and whatnot. And of course, count your bullets. Count how many uses you have left. At least that's what I do. I just find it very useful. Even though the game tells me how many shots I have left, I typically just count them in my head when I'm using Grenadier. And now for the last rabbit we'll cover, and that is the Shadow Rabbit. So the Shadow Rabbit, I don't know, it was supposed to be like the secret character, I think, initially upon a release. I think like many were told to put spoilers or like labels this class as spoilers because of the implications of it. But with that said, let's just get into the class. So her rotation goes something like this. It's kind of random bullshit go. And the reason why I say that is because of her core mechanic, which is whenever she uses her abilities, they typically have shackles. So shackles here, you can see when you use an ability, one of your attacks will be disabled at random. So for example, like initially, let's say I use my primary here, you can see my special is disabled. Can't use it. If I use it again, okay, it's still disabled. Use again, okay, now my secondary is disabled, and now I can use that special. So a rotation is something like this. I would say to use your secondary, you can use your defensive, your special, and then depending on which ability is unlocked, you would use it in that order. Now, you can use the same ability multiple times so long as it does not become disabled. So what you can do is, yeah, you can use the same one over and over. I will note that you can see here, the primary does a little bit more damage than the secondary, and the special does the most damage, but it's on a cooldown. So you won't always have access to it. Of these, it also slows you down a little, as you can see. Whereas the primary and the secondary do not slow you down. And I briefly showed earlier that the secondary has a dashing effect that also gives you invuln, just like Heavy Blade. Now, this one you have access to more consistently, I would say, than Heavy Blade's special, just because of of that. There's no cooldown with this one, but do note when it's disabled, because then you won't be able to use it for like invuln purposes. Like I can't use it right now. But yes, you can do a similar thing with like Heavy Blade, where you can use it as to dodge an unavoidable attack. Since the special does the most damage in her base kit, you want, when it's off cooldown and you have access to it, you should use it. And then use your primary and your secondary accordingly. You don't have to alternate between these. Some upgrades will actually reward you for using the same ability multiple times in a row. Now, there's also the defensive here. Now, since, as you can see, that lunge forward, I would say, like, yeah, she has very good range. The special is AoE. Really don't have to worry. It hits everything on screen. And then the primary has a bigger range. I think Heavy Blade as well. Bigger range than Heavy Blade's primary. And the secondary here. But because the secondary is so spammable, I would say be careful of when the target will move, because depending on who you're targeting, this lunge can sometimes send you into an orb. And unlike a projectile, you can't really graze it. You can't really like poke. So sometimes you can get hit, and especially if you are, because you have to be conscious of, okay, what abilities do I have are not locked currently. Sometimes you'll find you have to use your secondary. If, for example, your let's say your primary is disabled, your special is on cooldown, then you're kind of forced to use their secondary. Or you could use their defensive, but that's another thing entirely. The defensive here, as you can see, it does slow you down quite a bit. This is noteworthy because, like I mentioned with Hammermaid earlier, you definitely want to be careful of when you use it, because if you slow yourself down enough that like you're overlapping a lot of like a big orb and you can't really move out of it, yeah, like the window to go from your defensive to like your secondary to get like a brief invuln is pretty short, and even then I can't guarantee that like you'll be able to go from this invuln to this invuln. You might not even be able to. That is noteworthy. It also runs your GCD for 1 second. I believe you can still cancel it though. The wording is a little different, so I want to check that right now. See if you can still cancel into it. Maybe not. I'd have to double check, but it seems like it does. It also goes on GCD, kind of. Yeah, it does seem to go on GCD as well. Unlike other defensives. So that means like if you're using another ability and you're still in that GCD, you won't be able to use your defensive. Let me just see if okay, yeah, these are all 1 second. Yeah, so you saw that there. I pressed the special and then went into the defensive, but because the defensive has a GCD of itself, I wasn't able to use it yet. Yeah, you can see that. I buffered it that time, but you can see like it went from my secondary to my defensive. So there is that window right there. But I would say with the Shadow Rabbit, I never struggle with damage with Shadow Rabbit, which is really good for honestly any class. Like her damage output just feels very high. Like even unupgraded, it feels exceptionally high, and the upgrades just amplify this to an insane amount. Like the Opal one here, like, okay, resetting your special, charging it. Shadow Curse here, dealing a debuff that allows you to deal more damage, and you use it infrequently enough that you don't have to worry about it. Special here, look at this, it's just a nuke, but because the primary, I believe, yeah, the primary resets your special, you don't have to worry about this condition that it starts battles on cooldown and percentage chance triggers no longer happen. But that is noteworthy. And then like haste here, like I did have a run where I got this Opal upgrade, and it's just absurd. Like the amount of damage you can deal. Like this is this is bonkers. You can see this is without any loot. There's also the Sapphire upgrades, which in this case, another additional attack every time you use your secondary. Very nice. You can also, you know, gain charge whenever you use an ability, and also like even give yourself more invuln. I think like it changes it. So if I, yeah, let's see. So now it's charged. So if I use it, you see this one changes it so that way it doesn't, you don't dash towards the target, but now you need to have charged it to get any invuln out of it. Whereas the initial upgrade before, I guess there is a difference in that you see you have to be more than 3 rabbit leaps away from your target to get the invuln, which I don't think Heavy Blade has that condition in her special. So you'll notice that like when I have that condition satisfied, the rabbit leaps, the icon for the secondary will glow. I don't think, let me just double check real quickly that Heavy Blade, let's see. Yeah, so Heavy Blade doesn't have that condition in our kit. So with Shadow Rabbit, you have to be wary of that. Likewise, let's see. Yeah, so this one also just removes that, you know, if you're worried about the special slowing you down, you can just take this and no longer have to be worried about that. This one also removes the GCD condition and lowers it. So this is purely like defensive, getting a 10 second defensive. So it's really nice. Which means like you can cancel into it as well. This one's very interesting, like getting invuln when you whenever you're gaining omega charge whenever you're invuln, so you can take advantage of, you know, the thing is this invuln here does not count. I don't believe it counts the special. Oh no, it does, but you have to note that like you have to be your positioning depending on your secondary will give you invuln or not. You have to be far enough away. Like what? Let's see. Yeah, also deal damage to a large radius around you. Very nice. Yeah, instantly reset and supercharge itself. Yeah, so like you can spam it with this one, which is pretty interesting. And even gain access to Berserk, which is already like, you know, honestly, I would say not too big a difference already. Just because your GCDs were already just 1. So going from 1 to 0.8 is not as big of a difference, but it is there. Now there's also more percentage-based chance things like, you know, like supercharging and even, you know, erasing bullets, Shadow Cry here, getting that debuff in. I believe it's a debuff. No, this is not a debuff. This is a buff. And, you know, just dealing more damage. Now, the Emerald set I find the most fun because, like, for example, the Emerald primary here essentially rewards you for every 5 times you use it, it will do a big burst of damage. So it incentivizes you to but you can, the thing is like you can store these stacks. I don't think there's a time limit, but as you can see, like there is an RNG aspect of, you know, hoping that I get the chance off. There's also the Emerald secondary, which better demonstrates what I mentioned earlier, that some abilities will reward you for using them consecutively. Oh, okay, 6 times. Now we're back. 1, 2. Okay, yeah. You can see like, but it can get it can go up to 9. I think at least that's how high I've seen it go up to. Yeah, up to 9 times. But it is luck based. Or like, you know, just straight up like giving you the Book of Cheats effect, giving you like chaotic effects whenever you use your special. If you have a way of spamming the special, like if you have like I mentioned, like the Opal one earlier, you can just reset it, give yourself a bunch of effects, because why not? Like so. And also the defensive, which let's see, number of hits and cooldown greatly increased. Yeah, it just deals a lot of hits. 10 hits. 10 hits is even more than a defender. Just 8 hits on the primary. The thing is with Shadow Rabbit is that because I find her damage output to be so good, I tend not to even have issues if, let's say, I was in that case earlier where, let's say my special was on cooldown, my secondary and my primary is shackled, and the only ability I can use is my secondary. I don't even find it that big of a damage loss if I just don't do anything, because like I find that I just don't struggle with dealing damage enough that the boss will be enraged. So yeah, honestly, just really fun to play, and yeah, a worthy final class to cover for this series. So that is every single class in Rabbit and Steel. I know there's a balance update, I think, that is coming at some point to the game, so I may make an additional video just talking about, you know, some changes that are worth noting or whatnot. But that is pretty much it for this Rabbit and Steel series. I'll still be posting videos on Rabbit and Steel whenever I feel like it. Usually it's just like posting runs or like whatnot, but whatever is the case, this game has been so much fun to play, and as you could tell, I've been so absorbed in it that I have not even been doing any figure reviews as of late. So yeah, those were kind of on the back burner. I'll hopefully be getting back into them and doing some other content as per usual. So with that said, this is Tish signing off.